In 1895, Los Angeles was still half desert, half dream. There were no freeways, no palm-lined boulevards, and no Hollywood. But behind dusty streets and quiet rail stations, a quiet transformation was beginning, one that would reshape the entire American West. In 1895, Los Angeles was not yet the symbol it would one day become. It was a small, uncertain city of fewer than 100,000 people, set far from the nation's industrial and political centers, separated by distance, desert, and reputation. For much of the country, it still felt remote and unfamiliar, more frontier outpost than future metropolis. The streets were unpaved in many districts. Dust settled over wooden storefronts, modest homes, and scattered public buildings. Horse-drawn wagons moved beside the newer electric streetcars that had only recently begun to shape daily life. Railroads connected Los Angeles to San Francisco, the Midwest, and the East, but travel remained long and physically demanding, reinforcing the sense that this was a place at the edge of the American map. Beyond the town center, citrus groves stretched across wide valleys. Oranges and lemons were becoming the city's most reliable export, and agricultural promotion defined its public image. Los Angeles in 1895 was a city still inventing itself, unsure whether it would remain a regional farm town or grow into something far larger, and uncertain about what role it would ultimately play in the American story. Long before Los Angeles became an American city, this land already carried centuries of human history. For thousands of years, the region was home to the Tongva people, whose villages extended across what is now Los Angeles County, from the San Fernando Valley to the coastal plains and the Channel Islands. They lived in organized settlements, managed seasonal resources, traded across Southern California, and maintained spiritual and social systems tied closely to the land and water. The Los Angeles River, now mostly confined to concrete, once flowed freely through their territory and supported agriculture, fishing, and daily life. Spanish colonization altered that world beginning in 1769, when the Portola expedition entered the region. In 1781, 44 settlers established El Pueblo de Nuestra Señora la Reina de Los Angeles. Mission San Gabriel Archangel, founded earlier, became the center of forced conversion and labor for indigenous communities. Disease, displacement, and coercive systems rapidly reduced Tongva populations, reshaping both the people and the land. Under Mexican rule after 1821, large ranchos replaced mission holdings. Land grants created sprawling cattle estates, turning communal indigenous land into private property controlled by a small elite. When the United States took California in 1848, legal systems again transformed ownership. Many Mexican families lost their land through legal challenges, debt, and new property laws. By the time Los Angeles approached the 20th century, its land already bore the marks of displacement, layered ownership, and fading memory, setting patterns that would quietly shape the city's future. For most of the 19th century, Los Angeles remained physically and economically distant from the main arteries of American growth. That isolation ended in 1876, when the Southern Pacific Railroad completed its line from San Francisco to Los Angeles. For the first time, the city was directly connected to the national rail network. The journey that had once taken weeks by stagecoach or coastal shipping could now be completed in days. This single connection altered the city's trajectory more decisively than any local policy or development plan. Rail access immediately changed who could reach Los Angeles and what could leave it. Agricultural producers could now ship citrus, vegetables, and wine to markets across the country at predictable costs. Manufactured goods, construction materials, and consumer products flowed in. Land that had once been difficult to settle suddenly became viable for farming, housing, and commercial investment. The railroad did not simply bring trains. It brought a new economic logic. Competition intensified this effect. In 1885, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway opened a competing line into Los Angeles. A rate war followed. Passenger fares from the Midwest dropped dramatically, in some cases to less than $1. Newspapers in Chicago, St. Louis, and Kansas City promoted Southern California as a place of opportunity, health, and land ownership. Tens of thousands of migrants arrived within a few years, many of them middle-class families seeking farms, businesses, or retirement. Speculation quickly followed migration. Real estate syndicates subdivided former ranch lands into residential tracts. Developers such as Moses Sherman and Eli P. Clark invested heavily in electric streetcar lines to connect these new neighborhoods to the city center, raising land values almost overnight. Land that had been considered marginal suddenly became profitable. Between 1880 and 1890, Los Angeles' population increased from about 11,000 to more than 50,000. Property prices surged, and land transactions became the foundation of new personal fortunes. The railroad also reshaped power. Banks, land companies, and transportation firms gained increasing influence over municipal policy. Zoning, infrastructure funding, and public services began to reflect the needs of expanding suburbs, rather than the older town center. Growth was no longer incremental. It became speculative, promotional, and highly competitive. Not everyone benefited equally. Small farmers struggled to compete with larger operations that had better rail access. Indigenous communities and Mexican landholders, already weakened by earlier legal and economic pressures, found themselves further marginalized as land prices rose and property taxes increased. The railroad did not create these inequalities, but it intensified them by accelerating the conversion of land into commodities. By the early 1890s, Los Angeles had entered a new phase. Its economy was no longer defined primarily by local agriculture or regional trade. It was now connected to national capital markets, national labor flows, and national consumer demand. The city's future had become tied to forces far beyond its borders. This transformation did not unfold according to a single master plan. It emerged from overlapping corporate decisions, rate wars, promotional campaigns, and speculative investment. Yet its consequences were irreversible. The railroad had turned Los Angeles into a place that could be reached, marketed, and monetized at scale. What followed was not simply growth, but a chain reaction of wealth creation, migration, and land speculation that would lay the groundwork for the next great chapter in the city's history. The citrus boom and the rise of its first millionaires. By the 1890s, Southern California's climate and rail access combined to create one of the most profitable agricultural industries in the United States. Oranges became more than a crop. They became the economic engine that transformed land into capital and farmers into financiers. Irrigation made that transformation possible. Water projects such as the Los Angeles City Water Company system and private canal networks allowed previously dry land to be planted with citrus. Groves expanded rapidly across Pasadena, Riverside, Redlands, and the San Gabriel Valley. Cooperative marketing organizations, including the Southern California Fruit Exchange, later known as Sunkist, standardized packing, branding, and national distribution. Oranges were no longer sold as regional produce. They were marketed as a symbol of health and prosperity across the country. This system created a new class of wealthy growers and investors. Families such as the Gages, the Chandlers, and large land syndicates acquired thousands of acres, while financiers reinvested profits into real estate, rail extensions, and utilities. Agriculture merged with banking and land speculation. Land values rose sharply, and citrus profits flowed into urban development. The wealth did not distribute evenly. Small growers often carried heavy debt and depended on cooperative prices, while larger operators consolidated land and influence. Citrus wealth reshaped neighborhoods, social clubs, and political power, introducing new money into Los Angeles and deepening divisions between landowners, laborers, and those left outside the rising prosperity. By the turn of the 20th century, Los Angeles was no longer content to grow quietly. City leaders, railroad companies, and real estate syndicates began selling an idea as aggressively as they sold land. What they promoted was not simply a place to live, but a promise of transformation. Railroad companies such as the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe distributed millions of pamphlets across the Midwest and Eastern United States. These brochures depicted Southern California as a land of permanent sunshine, fertile soil, and effortless prosperity. Illustrations showed orange groves stretching to the horizon, white homes surrounded by gardens, and families living free from the industrial smoke and disease associated with eastern cities. Health resorts, fresh air, and year-round outdoor living became central themes. The city's Chamber of Commerce coordinated national advertising campaigns that framed Los Angeles as both a refuge and an opportunity. Medical claims became part of this message. Promotional materials suggested that the region's dry climate could cure tuberculosis, asthma, and other chronic illnesses. While physicians debated such claims, migration continued to surge. Entire communities relocated in search of recovery and stability, reshaping the city's demographics. These campaigns did more than attract residents. They guided public policy. Infrastructure spending, water expansion, and transit development were justified as necessary to support the idealized city being promised to the nation. Land use decisions increasingly favored suburban tracts, garden neighborhoods, and resort districts designed to match the image being marketed. The result was a city growing not only from economic forces, but from an engineered narrative. Los Angeles was being built to resemble its advertisements. The dream was no longer a slogan. It had become a blueprint, quietly steering how land was developed, who was welcomed, and whose needs were prioritized. The advertisements promised prosperity. But the people who arrived in Los Angeles were often driven by far more personal and urgent reasons. Census records, passenger lists, and local directories from the 1880s through the early 1900s reveal a steady stream of families, widows, aging laborers, and small farmers leaving the Midwest, the South, and the Great Plains. Many had been displaced by falling crop prices, bank failures, and drought. Others arrived because physicians had advised them to seek a dry climate to manage tuberculosis, asthma, or chronic respiratory illness. Some came with modest savings, hoping to purchase a few acres of citrus land. Others arrived with little more than personal belongings, searching for wage work in packing houses, rail yards, and construction crews. Widowed women frequently appear in property and boarding house records, running small businesses or renting rooms to new arrivals. Speculators arrived alongside them, purchasing tracts of land in bulk and reselling them in subdivided parcels. This mix of vulnerability and ambition shaped the city's social structure. Los Angeles was not built only by financiers and developers. It was also built by families trying to survive economic collapse, aging workers searching for stability, and newcomers seeking health as much as wealth. The city grew from both opportunity and necessity, raising an unresolved question that lingered beneath its expansion. Who would ultimately benefit from the city that was taking shape, and who would be left outside its promised dot by the late 1890s? Los Angeles was growing faster than its natural environment could easily sustain. The city depended almost entirely on the Los Angeles River and a network of shallow wells that drew from local groundwater. These sources had supported a small agricultural town, but they were never designed to supply a rapidly expanding population. Growing suburbs and thousands of acres of irrigated citrus groves, seasonal shortages began to appear quietly. Dry years reduced river flow. Wells in some districts showed declining levels. In 1893, city officials approved the first significant bond measures to expand municipal water infrastructure, including additional reservoirs, pipelines, and pumping facilities. The Los Angeles City Water Company was reorganized under municipal control in 1902, bringing water planning directly under city authority. Engineers and planners recognized the underlying problem. Studies commissioned in the 1890s warned that local water sources could not sustain projected growth. Reports circulated among city leaders and business interests, noting that continued suburban expansion and agricultural development would soon exceed available supply. These discussions remained largely out of public view. To the outside world, Los Angeles was still being marketed as a land of unlimited sunshine and opportunity. Internally, however, the city was beginning to confront the limits of its environment. Water had quietly emerged as the most critical constraint on growth, and decisions being considered in private meetings would soon set the stage for conflicts that would reshape Southern California's political, legal, and physical landscape for decades to come. By the early 20th century, Los Angeles was no longer a single unified town expanding outward in all directions. Growth had begun to organize itself into distinct social and economic layers. Electric streetcar lines, land prices, and private deed restrictions quietly shaped who could live where, creating early forms of separation that would harden over time. Affluent newcomers settled in newly promoted districts such as Pasadena, South Pasadena, and parts of West Adams, where large homes, paved streets, and landscaped boulevards reflected rising land values. Real estate developers marketed these areas as refined and orderly, often attaching restrictive covenants to property deeds that limited ownership based on race, ethnicity, and sometimes religion. These clauses, though not always publicly emphasized, became common features of subdivision plans. Working-class families, many of them recent migrants or long-time residents displaced by rising costs, were pushed toward industrial zones, rail corridors, and flood-prone areas near the Los Angeles River. Access to public services such as paved roads, sewer systems, and street lighting varied sharply by neighborhood. Infrastructure followed investment, not need. These invisible borders did not appear dramatic on city maps, but they shaped daily life. Where people could live influenced where they could work, attend school, and build social networks. By the time Los Angeles entered the new century, opportunity itself had begun to organize geographically, quietly laying the foundation for social tensions that would later define the city's identity. By 1895, Los Angeles stood in a moment of controlled acceleration. The city had crossed a threshold that could not be reversed, yet it had not fully entered the era that would soon define it. Population growth was steady and increasingly diversified. New neighborhoods appeared almost as quickly as streets could be laid and streetcar tracks installed. Building permits rose year after year. Land offices multiplied. Banks expanded their lending portfolios, and municipal departments struggled to keep pace with new demands for water, roads, schools, and public safety. Behind the outward appearance of prosperity, structural pressure was accumulating. Water reserves were already being stretched. Property prices were rising faster than wages. Speculative land subdivisions were expanding beyond existing infrastructure, relying on future development to justify present valuations. Public utilities, still fragmented between private companies and municipal control, were nearing capacity. City leaders spoke publicly of opportunity and confidence. Internally, they debated limits, planning, and expansion strategies. Engineers produced reports that warned of looming shortages. Developers pushed outward. Rail companies continued to promote migration. Los Angeles was no longer waiting to become something else. It was already in motion. The mechanisms of expansion were fully engaged, and the next phase would not be incremental. It would be transformative, fast, and difficult to contain. By the closing years of the 19th century, Los Angeles had reached a rare and fragile moment in its history. It was no longer an isolated frontier town, yet it had not fully become the vast urban system that would soon stretch across Southern California. Its streets were busier, its rail connections secure, and its land increasingly treated as an asset rather than a landscape. New neighborhoods were being drawn onto maps faster than they could be built, and population figures continued to climb. Behind the optimism, the city was already making choices that would shape generations. Decisions about water control, land subdivision, transportation corridors, and residential zoning were quietly establishing the framework of a metropolitan region that did not yet exist. These were not abstract plans. They were practical responses to growth, profit, and competition. Los Angeles was standing at the edge of a transformation that would redefine its scale, its social structure, and its environmental limits. Whether this future unfolded because of geography and climate, or because of ambition, promotion, and speculation, remained an open question. What was certain is that the city was about to become something far larger than its founders had ever imagined. Asterisk.